Common sense. I want to start there with that phrase because over the years I've developed a real grudge against it. And the grudge has two parts. One, it isn't common, and two, it isn't sense. Other than those two small problems, it's a really good phrase. When people say common sense, here's what they actually mean. They mean the stuff that I had to learn that I now quietly resent you for not already knowing. It's experience wearing a disguise. It's a gate that's been painted to look like a floor. Somebody stands on top of a pile of their own scars and calls the view obvious, and then gets annoyed that you can't see it from the bottom. I do this. I do this all the time, and I didn't realize how much I did it until about a month ago when I read a business book about artificial intelligence, and it got mad at it for being right. We'll get to the book, but let me tell you where my so-called common sense in computer science actually comes from, because it matters for the rest of this. I was about 5 years old. It was 1984, and I pulled a computer out of a dumpster. I'm not being cute here. This was a TRS-80, a Radio Shack machine, sitting in a dumpster behind a building in upstate New York. And 5-year-old me decided that it was mine now. So I hauled it home, I hid it in my closet, because I was reasonably sure that if an adult saw it, they'd make it go away, the way adults made all the interesting things go away. And in that closet, with no manual, no internet, obviously, and not one single human being within 100 miles who could have explained to me what I was looking at, I taught myself how to make it do things. You want to know my real first program? I digitized the Lone Wolf game books, the Choose Your Own Adventure fantasy books, the ones where you flip to section 187 if you want to fight the thing, and section 204 if you want to run. I turned those into something the machine could run, branching paths and all, because I wanted to play them without flipping pages. I was maybe 7 by the time I got through all this. I want to tell it to you because I thought it was visionary. It wasn't. I was just a kid who wanted the book to do the work for him, which, now that I say it out loud, is the entire history of computing really in one sentence. That was the start of it, at least. My start into computers. And the through line of everything after. Every single thing was the same. Trial by fire. Figure it out. Break it. Sit in the wreckage for a while. Figure out why it broke. Make it work. There was no other way to learn at the time because there was, for me at that point in time, no one to ask. There was no internet, no YouTube videos, no TikTok challenges. The struggle wasn't a phrase I went through on my way to competence. The struggle was competence. And now, here's the part that I really think about a lot, and the part that I think is specific to my particular tranche of being human. I'm Generation X, and we are standing on the exact seam of the thing. We started our lives with no computers at all. We had rotary phones, we had card catalogs. You wanted to know something, you drove to a building full of books and you looked it up. And if it wasn't there, well, you simply didn't know it. And you just lived. And we are ending our careers, the ones that we have left anyway, surrounded by machines that can write, reason, argue, and hallucinate with total confidence. We caught the whole arc. We are the only people who remember the before and now are living in the after. And we did it while the floor was lava the entire time. Think about the timing. We went to university right into the dot-com bust. We watched our futures evaporate the week we got our diplomas. We stepped into leadership right as Lehman and Bear Stearns took the global economy out behind the shed in 2008. And a bunch of us slid into the C-suite, into the rooms where the big calls getting made right as COVID arrived and essentially torched the entire rulebook. Every single major milestone of my professional life arrived with an economic collapse stapled to it. That's not just bad luck. At this point, it's just a Tuesday. Half my career, little job titles that I've held, do not exist anymore. The work is essentially evaporated. So we adapted, because the alternative was not to eat. We spent our entire working lives drinking from a fire hose, getting knocked down, and being told that the fire hose is the opportunity. So, because we're constantly being deluged with all this change, we've developed tricks. Quiet, unglamorous, hard-won tricks for surviving change that never, ever, ever stop coming. And I used to call those tricks common sense. So, when somebody handed me a glossy business book that promises to teach leaders how to harness AI, my reflex, my honest gag reflex, is to roll my eyes so hard I can see my own brain. Another fire hose, another guru, another deck. Well, I read it anyway. The book is called The AA Driven Leader, by a guy named Geoff Woods. And the uncomfortable thing I have to report to you is that the book is not the problem. I am the problem. I forgot something. I forgot that I'm not the hip new generation anymore. I forgot that the stuff that I sneer at obvious is genuinely completely new to a lot of very smart people who never had to pull a computer out of a dumpster to learn anything. And calling it common sense isn't humility, it's gatekeeping with a smile on. Welcome back to Transmissions from Elysium. This one's a bit long, it's a book review, and it's a little bit of a reckoning. Go grab a coffee and let's get started. Let me tell you what the book actually is fairly, because I'm going to give it a hard time for the next half an hour, and I want to be honest about it up front. Mock the thing you love, that's the rule here. Geoff Woods, not an engineer. He's a growth and leadership guy. He ran the company behind Gary Keller's The One Thing, that whole world. And then he was an executive of a large company where he'll tell you he helped the market cap go up by a frankly cartoonish amount. So when he writes about AI, he's not coming at you as a researcher who can explain a large language transformer. He's coming at you at a guy who is very, very good at the human part, the decisions, the leverage, the strategy. And the thesis of his book is one clean idea, and it's a good one. It's this. Most leaders are using AI to do their tasks a little bit faster. Better emails, quicker summaries, tidier slide decks. Wood says that's the booby prize. That's not what this is for. The real move, he says, is to stop using AI as a faster intern and start using it as a thinking partner. Use it to make better decisions, not just more documents. We talked about this in the past episode. His line is, if you are the thought leader, the AI is the thought partner. And the mantra he repeats until you want to put a tattoo on it is strategy first, technology second. Now, if you've listened to the show before, you know I've said almost that exact same thing in those exact same words for years. The tech is the hammer. It's never the carpenter. So my first reaction to this all again was my eye roll and the yes, obviously next. But that's the gatekeeping reflex again. Because here's the thing about strategy first, technology second. It's completely true. It's also apparently not at all obvious. Because if it were obvious, I would not be spending so much of my week watching very smart organizations do the exact opposite all the time. So let's go through it. Woods has a handful of name frameworks in this book, and I'm going to take each one, tell you a scar where I personally learned it long before it gave it a name, and then we'll figure out together whether it's actually new or whether it's just old wisdom that finally got written down. Spoiler, for a lot of this, it's the second one. But the writing it down turns out to matter more than my ego really wanted it to. The first principle of the book, strategy first, technology second. I told you that's the spine of the book, and let me tell you where I got this carved into me. A while back, I was at a large manufacturer, on the payroll, not an outside consultant, and that matters for this story because the call I'm about to describe was coming from the building I worked in. The kind of company that grew by eating other companies, acquisition after acquisition, until the inside of the place looked like a stitched-together monster. Every business unit ran on whatever it had been running on the day it got bought. Different systems, different data, different definitions of basic words like customer and revenue. That did not agree with each other. It was a terrible mess. And there was a plan on the table. The plan was phenomenal. It was this. We were going to roll out Power BI across the entire enterprise. And it's going to replace the existing stack. It's going to unify everything. And there'll be one dashboard to rule them all. And we're going to see the whole business in one pane of glass. It was phenomenal. But here's the part I need you to think about, because this is the whole point. The plan did not come from a problem. Nobody had walked in and said, here's the decision we keep getting wrong, and here's what it's costing us. No. This was a flight of fancy for one executive who had somewhere seen a demo, read an article on a plane, watched a competitor brag at a conference, and decided that Power BI everywhere all at once was the future. There was no actual basis in reality under it. It was a vibe with a budget. And I want to be clear, Power BI is a great tool. I have nothing against it. I use it all the time at work. The tool isn't the problem. The problem wasn't even that the technology was an answer to a strategy question. It was worse than that. It was a technology answer to no question at all. It was enormous in scope. It had no real buy-in from anyone in throughout the organization who'd actually have to live with it. The analysts and operators on the floors, the ones who had already had their own ways of seeing their own piece of the world, and it was risky in the specific way that big bang rollouts always are risky, which is that if any one of 40,000 interlocking assumptions is wrong, The whole thing comes crashing down like a house of cards, and you got nothing. And now you've also burned the trust that you need to try it again. Well, long before I got there, someone had decided that this new tool is strategy. But the tool is never the strategy. The strategy was the boring question nobody wanted to sit with, which is, what's the one decision this business keeps getting wrong because the data's a mess? And what is the smallest, least heroic thing we can do to fix just that? Not unify everything, fix the one thing that, once it's fixed, makes a dozen other things easier or unnecessary. The last sentence, by the way, is almost word for word with Geoff Woods quoting Gary Keller. The one thing. Find the lever such that its pulling makes everything downstream lighter. I didn't know it was a framework. I just knew that betting the company on a 40-foot Power BI rollout with no buy-in was how you end up explaining to a board why you spent 2 years and a fortune making people angrier than they were before. That's the strategy first, technology second. That's it. That's the whole principle. And I would have told you it was common sense, except I have personally watched it be uncommon enough to vaporize budgets and companies that could afford to know better. Woods didn't make it up. He just refused to let you skip it. And sometimes refusing to let people skip the obvious thing is really the entire value. Principle 2. The framework he calls crit, and the one weird trick inside it. Okay, this is one part of the book that's the most concrete, and honestly, the most useful for people using AI in their day-to-day operations. And it's where I started nodding along with the book against my will. Woods has a prompting framework. He calls it crit. Context, role, interview, task. The idea is when you talk to one of these models, you give it the full context of your situation, you assign it a role, act as a CFO with 15 years of manufacturing. You give it the task you actually want, and a piece of what he calls the secret weapon. You tell it to interview you first. His exact instruction is something like, interview me, ask one question at a time, up to 3 questions to get the context you need. You let the machine ask you questions before it even starts thinking about giving you answers. When I read that, I laughed. Not a mean laugh. A laugh of recognition, the kind you do when somebody describes your old childhood back to you. Because that exact loop is what I was doing back in the closet in 1984. Here's what learning to program on a dead computer with no manual is actually like. You type in something, you're guessing, you hit enter, the machine says syntax error, that's it. That's all it gives you. And what I understand now that I could not have told you then is that that error message is the machine interviewing. It's asking a question. It's saying, I don't understand, give me more context. So you give it more. You change one thing. You add a semicolon. Syntax error, another question. You change another thing. Eventually it runs. The frog floats, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That loop, attempt, interrogation, more context, attempt. And that is how I learn literally everything I know. And the punchline of my entire career is that the thing that makes someone a senior engineer or a real leader instead of a junior one is whether they ever transfer that loop from the machine to human beings. Because the junior instinct when you become a lead is to give answers. Somebody brings you a problem, you've got the answer, bang, here you go, next. It feels productive. It feels like leadership. You solve something. It is the worst thing you can do at that level. The senior move, the one that took me years and a few genuinely embarrassing moments to learn, is to shut up and interview. Ask one question at a time. Pull the context out of the person, because 9 times out of 10, they already know the answer and they just need someone to ask them the right question in the right order. The best leaders I've ever known barely answer anything. They ask devastating questions slowly. So when Wood tells you the secret weapon of the AI age is teaching the machine to interview you before it answers, here's my honest reaction. He's absolutely right. It's a Socratic method come life. It's a good therapist. It's a great business analyst in gathering requirements. It's a sensei who won't just tell you the move. It's every patient teacher you ever had. The machine asking you questions before it spits out an answer, it's not a breakthrough in artificial intelligence. It's basic from a closet in 1984, finally talking back in full sentences. But again, I have to correct my own sneer here. The fact that you have to be told to do this means that it is not, in fact, common. Most people never learn to ask before they answer. They die giving answers nobody asked for. If a sticky note that says CRIT on someone's monitor gets them to interview before they pontificate, then God bless that little sticky note. Principle 3. AI is your thought partner. This is really the warm and fuzzy center of the book. The idea that AI isn't a tool you command, it's a colleague you think alongside with. Woods has this line about how with a good thinking partner, 1 + 1 = 11. You bring half the idea, it brings provocation, and something exists at the end that neither of you would have gotten to alone. And look, this is the one that should sound like the most marketing fluff, the thinking partner. Sure, buddy. But I want to tell you a story about why this one lodged me, because I know exactly what it feels like to not have one. In grad school, I was doing masters at Florida State, and I was paying for it by working overnight shift at Walmart. This is physics years. So picture the schedule. I'd close out a night stuffing shells under lights that hum, a frequency designed to slowly remove your soul. Drive to campus more or less directly, and try to do graduate level physics on no sleep. I was exhausted in a way that I can still feel in my back teeth if I think about it too hard. The kind of tired where you're technically awake and operating heavy machinery, in this case, your own brain, well past the point where you should be allowed to. So one night I'm in the magnetics lab and I'm rushing. FSU really has one of the greatest magnetic labs in the world. Enormous magnetic fields, and I am speed running an experiment because I have to be at work in a few hours. I have not slept, and I just want a result. I'm cutting corners. I am not, in any meaningful sense, thinking. I'm just doing the steps to get to the end. And I end up with a frog, floating, in the bore of the magnet, just hanging there in midair, slowly turning, looking deeply unbothered. Now, I want to be honest with you about what happened in my head because it's a whole point of the story. For a few solid minutes, sleep-deprived me generally thought I have lost my mind. I thought, that's it. The night shift finally did it. I'm hallucinating amphibians. And then a different, slower part of my brain went, no, that's real. That's a diamagnetic levitation. Water is weakly diamagnetic, and the frog is more water than the field is strong enough to lift it. And there was this one beautiful, lonely second where I understood something real about the universe at 3 in the morning, exhausted, completely alone, with a frog who had gotten into the lab somehow. Here's the thing I didn't have. I didn't have anybody to turn to and say, are you seeing this? Do you understand what this means? There was nobody in that room, and it turns out I hadn't really discovered anything. A physicist named Andre Game floated a frog in the same way back in 1997, so about 10 years too early, and won an Ig Nobel Prize for it. Well, later he won a Nobel for other work. The phenomenon was well known. I rediscovered it alone by accident while being too tired to think. Everything old, even then, was new to me. The second brain, the one that catches what your fried brain almost throws away, the lab partner, who never showed up, says, wait, did you see what you just did? That's what Woods is selling when he says thinking partner. And I get the appeal at a cellular level because I have stood in a room at 3 in the morning with a floating frog and no one to tell. I had to be both people. I had to be the exhausted idiot running through the experiment at the slower voice that said, no, look closer, that matters. Is this an AI thinking partner new? Oh no. Humans have always needed a second mind. That's what colleagues are for. That's what mentors are for. That's what a good spouse is for. Frankly, the person who says, are you sure about that at the right moment? The new part, the only new part, is that the second mind is now available at 3 in the morning. Never tired, never annoyed that you woke it up, infinitely patient with your half-formed nonsense. For a guy who did his best thinking, exhausted and alone, I'm not going to pretend that's nothing. It might be the part of all this that I've wanted the most back then. Principle number 4, the AI Board of Advisors. This one really is just an extension of the thinking partner idea, and it's the one I think is generally clever as a technique, even though the underlying move is ancient. Wood says, don't just ask the AI one question as one persona. Convene a board, take a real decision you're facing, and run it past a whole panel of expert roles. Ask it to respond as a skeptical CFO, then as your most demanding customer, then as a competitor who wants you dead, then as a regulator. Each lens catches a different blind spot. You surface the objections before reality surfaces for you in public very expensively. Now here's where I learned this one, and I'm going to keep it generic on purpose because some of it I can't talk about in detail, and the rest I just won't. For most of my career, I did a lot of work consulting with some of the work for Department of Defense clients, and I want to tell you, the defense world will cure you fast and forever of the idea that you should make an important decision by yourself and just hope. In that world, red teaming isn't a nice to have, it's really the law of the land. You do not move a serious decision forward until you have deliberately, formally, sometimes painfully, run it past people whose entire jobs is to check boxes on a form and find the way it gets you killed. The adversary's perspective, the auditor's perspective, the safety officer who assumes everything you built is broken, the program office that assumes you're over budget and lying about it. You sit in these huge rooms, and people who are paid to disagree with you take your beautiful plan apart on purpose, while you're still allowed to change it. It's deeply unpleasant, and it's the single most valuable meeting in the building, because the alternative to being uncomfortable in that room is being catastrophically comfortable right up until the moment the thing fails for real, with the stakes that defense work has. That is the AI Board of Advisors. It's red teaming. It's the pre-mortem. It's the let's assume this has already failed now, tell me why. It is a discipline that serious organizations have practiced for as long as there have been serious organizations with something to lose. So when Woods tells you you can summon a skeptical CFO and a hostile competitor and a furious regulator in a small little chat window in 2 minutes for free, my reaction is again a tired sort of admiration, because convening an actual red team is expensive and slow, and it requires you to find actual humans who are senior enough to matter and brave enough to disagree with you to your face, which in most corporate cultures is exceedingly rare and a career-limiting trait. Most leaders never get red teamed because nobody around them is willing to do it. If a language model will play the role of the person in the room brave enough to tell you you're wrong, then you've just democratized the most valuable avoided meeting in the business. And that's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. The catch, and Wood is lighter on this than I like, is that the AI red team only works if you actually let it land. The whole reason real red teaming is rare is not that it's hard to organize, is that it's all psychologically brutal to hear, and the AI version is very easy to simply close the tab on. The skeptical CFO is only useful if you don't rewrite the prompt until it agrees with you. And I watch people do exactly that. They convene the board says the plan's a mess, and they keep asking it until they get an answer that they wanted in the first place. The tool can hand you the objection. It can't make you brave enough to sit with it. That part's still on you. That part is always on you. And the last principle here, principle 5, productivity versus strategy, and the leverage problem. This is one that ties the whole book together. It's the one where Woods earns the title for me because it's where he says the quiet thing out loud. His model is that AI gives you value at 3 levels. The bottom level, where pretty much everybody lives, is productivity. You doing your tasks, but faster. The middle level is operations. Your processes running more efficiently. And the top level, the one almost nobody reaches, is strategy, where product or the decision itself gets more valuable. And he leans on the old 80-20 idea. 80% of your results come from 20% of what you do. And that 20% is almost always strategic decisions and not tasks. So pouring all your AI into doing tasks faster is like installing a rocket engine in a car and using it to get to the mailbox slightly quicker. I learned this one the hard way. The way I learned it is almost embarrassing and how on the nose it is. Early in my career, I was the kid who could do everything. Fast hands. You needed something built, I built it. Probably overnight. Probably while I was supposed to be doing something else. My entire identity, the whole sense of worth, was wrapped up in raw output. I was a one-man production line, and I was proud of it. And then I got recruited, although, more honest word, the one I actually used is kidnapped. A guy named Hiroshi pulled me halfway across the planet to run an entire technology program for a company in Japan. I'm not going to name it. Director of IT, new country, new language, a culture I did not remotely understand yet, a tech operation that was all mine, all of it to run. And here's what the job did to me. It broke the fast hands kid on purpose, for my own good. Because you cannot code your way out of running an entire technology organization in a country where you can barely order lunch. Everything was on fire all the time, and all of it had my name on it. The servers, the network, the guy who can't print, the founder who wants a thing by Friday, and language I was still learning. And there is no version of work harder or type faster that gets you out of that. You cannot outproduce it. It is physically, mathematically impossible. The firehose will win. And what the job actually turned out to be, once I stopped flailing, was herding cats, managing people, aligning stakeholders who didn't agree with each other and half the time didn't share the language with me. The work wasn't the work anymore. The work was deciding which work mattered and getting a room full of humans to shake their heads. And in that job, exhausted and underwater and a long way from places that were familiar, I learned the single most important lesson of my professional life. And I learned it because there was no other way to survive. I learned to decide what not to do. To let things burn on purpose. To look at 30 screaming priorities and coldly identify the 2 that actually mattered. To whether the company lived, and consciously, deliberately, let the other 28 wait or fail. Triage. The thing they teach you in emergency medicine, which, not coincidentally, I also do. You don't treat the loudest patient, you treat the one whose outcome you can actually change. And you walk past the rest. And you gotta live with it. Doing more was never the answer. Doing more was a trap. The leverage was never in my fast hands. It was in my judgment about which of the fires deserved the water. That's productivity versus strategy. That's the 80-20. I didn't get that from a book. I got it from being a one-man IT shop with no sleep and no help, which I would not recommend as a curriculum. But, it does work. And here's why this principle is one that actually scares me a little in the present tense. Because AI is probably one of the greatest productivity amplifiers in modern human history. It will let everyone instantly do vastly more. And if the only thing you've learned is do more, AI is going to help you do more faster forever, straight off a cliff. I did a whole episode a little while back about this, about the slop, about how we've built a machine that produces infinite plausible output and calls it progress. AI that just helps you generate more stuff you didn't need to generate isn't an upgrade. It's a trap I almost died in as a kid, except now it's frictionless, and it comes with a subscription. The skill was never production. Production is free now. The skill is, and always was, knowing which fire deserves the water. Okay, I want to step back because I spent 5 segments telling you that everything in this good book is something I already knew. And I need to be honest about what that actually reveals. And it's not what my ego wanted to reveal. For most of this episode, the implied posture has been, I knew all this already. This old wisdom dressed up in new clothes. And there's a version of me, the worst version, the one I'm trying to talk myself out of being, who stops there, who reads a genuinely helpful book and dismisses it because it didn't teach him personally anything new, as if he is the audience, as if the value of the book is measured by whether it surpassed one specific tired Gen X CTO who pulled a computer out of a dumpster. Here's the thing I had to sit with. I'm the old guy now. That's hard to say. I spent so long being the youngest person in every serious room, the kid prodigy, the one who learned it in the closet, that I generally did not notice the day it flipped. But it flipped. And there was a whole generation of brilliant, capable people coming up behind me who never got my education. Not because they're less smart. They're not. Oftentimes, most of the time, they're smarter. They just never had to be. They never had to have the trial by fire because the fire got regulated and patented and abstracted away in some YouTube video. They never had to pull a computer out of a dumpster because the computer was always just there in the palm of their hand as smartphones, glowing, working, friendly. They never sat in a room and got red teamed into the ground because somewhere along the way we decided that wasn't too pleasant. So all those tricks I call common sense, they're not. They were never common. They were the rare and specific scar tissue of a generation that caught the scene between worlds and had to improvise across it. And when I call them obvious, when I roll my eyes at a book that bothers to write them down, what I'm actually doing is hoarding. I'm standing on the pile of my scars, calling the view obvious, and being quietly annoyed that people at the bottom can't see it. That's the gatekeeping I started this whole thing complaining about. And I do it. That's the confession. So this is me changing my own mind on the record. The AI-driven leader is a good book. Not because it's new to me, but precisely because it isn't. Because Geoff Woods did the actual work, the patient, unglamorous, deeply uncool work of taking the hard-won instincts that a lot of us just have and just been quietly running for 40 years and writing down in plain English. So the people who didn't get the fire can have the lessons without the burns. That's not nothing. That's a generous act. That's a guy holding the gate open instead of standing on it. So let me bring this home and let me have a little fun on the way out because I've been very sincere for several minutes now and it's making me itch. If you've been paying attention to the culture lately, you'll have noticed that the generations behind us are heroically rediscovering things. And every time they do, they give it a brave new name and post about it like they've returned from the moon. They've rediscovered wired headphones. They're revolutionary. There's no battery, never disconnects. The audio's better. We just called those headphones. They've rediscovered the flip phone, now marketed as a dumb phone for the digital wellness. We just called that a phone. They've rediscovered vinyl, film cameras, and writing paper in a notebook. Somebody recently described with real wonder the experience of raw dogging a flight, which, when you read the definition, turns out to mean sitting on an airplane and just looking out the window without a screen. A profile in courage. We called that in 1994. There's body doubling for focus, which is working in the same room as another person, which we call the library. There's loud budgeting, which a person being broke and saying it out loud. There's the micro retirement, which is, and I checked, a sabbatical or getting fired. And it's not just the kids, and it's not just the culture. We do it too in tech, constantly, with a completely straight face. We discovered server-side rendering a few years ago and acted like we split the atom. That's PHP. That's 1994. We discovered local first software, the radical idea that maybe your app should work on your own computer. We called that software. A whole discipline appeared called prompt engineering, the art of asking a machine clear, well-structured question, which is a skill set that reference librarians have for a century, and the rest of us used to call knowing how to Google. We've got AI agents, which, when you pop the hood on a lot of them, are cron jobs and if statements wearing a trench coat. And on-prem is making a comeback, which is hilarious to those of us who never actually left. Everything old is new again. Everything old is AI again. And right at the top of the pile, with total sincerity, sits the phrase AI-driven leadership, which is, and Geoff, I say this with real affection because I genuinely liked your book, leadership. It's leadership strategy first. Ask good questions, get red teamed, decide what not to do, find the one lever. That's the oldest stuff in the world. You just put a chat box on it. Here's where I land, and I mean this no sarcasm less than a tank. AI is nothing new. It's a generally powerful tool doing the same old thing that every tool has ever done, which is amplify whatever you already are. If you're strategic, it'll make you more strategic. If you're a slot machine, it'll make you a faster slot machine. The tool is a mirror with a motor on it. But the lessons, the actual lessons, the one about strategy and questions and judgment and restraint, those were never common. And common sense is a lie we tell to feel superior to people who simply weren't in the room when we got burned. And every once in a while, someone does the real work of writing those lessons down so the next people don't have to bleed for them. Woods did that. So read the book. Genuinely, I mean it. Go read it. And then go earn the scars anyway. Because here's the one thing the book can't give you, and I can't give you, and the machine definitely can't give you. The reading is not knowing. You have the whole map handed to you, beautifully drawn, and you will still not know the territory until you've walked it in the dark and fallen in a few holes and broken your ankle. The frog has to actually float in front of your own exhausted eyes at 3 in the morning. The Power BI rollout has to actually almost blow up in your hands. You have to give the wrong answer when you should have asked a question and watch it cost you before ask first lives in your bones instead of on a sticky note. The tool will hand you the lesson. You still have to go get the scar. That part's not for sale and it's not automatable. And thank God, because it's the last thing that's still entirely, stubbornly ours. I'll see you next time. Go ask somebody a good question and maybe pick up a computer out of a dumpster. It builds character.